She had everything. He had nothing. Yet when she saw him return that formula, choosing hunger over debt, dignity over desperation, she realized she'd been measuring wealth wrong her entire life. This is what happened when a CEO discovered that some men are rich in ways money can't touch. Victoria Castellanos stood in the express lane of a 24-hour grocery store at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, holding a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She was 41 years old, CEO of Castellanos Retail Group, a woman whose net worth had 9 figures and whose personal life had exactly 0 people who would notice if she disappeared. The wine was for drinking alone in her penthouse while reviewing quarterly reports. This had become her routine. Work until exhaustion made sleep possible, purchase something expensive and meaningless, return to empty luxury, repeat. She wasn't paying attention to anything around her until she heard the card reader beep its rejection tone. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of poverty in a world built for credit. She glanced up, more out of habit than interest, and saw him. Marcus Chen stood 2 lanes over, holding a canister of baby formula in hands that looked like they'd forgotten what rest felt like. He was maybe 32, wearing clothes that were clean but worn past their intended lifespan. His face carried the particular exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs with no end in sight. The cashier, a teenager with purple hair and bored eyes, watched him with the practiced indifference of someone who'd seen this scene 100 times. Marcus looked at the formula, then at the card reader, then at the small collection of items in his basket. Instant ramen, the cheapest bread, peanut butter, baby wipes, the formula. His jaw tightened in a way that told Victoria he was doing mathematics in his head, the cruel calculations of poverty that people like her never had to perform. He made his choice with quiet efficiency. He picked up the formula canister and handed it back to the cashier. "I don't need this one," he said. His voice was steady, no pleading, no explanation. Just a simple statement of fact that broke something in Victoria's chest. The teenager took the formula without comment and rescanned his remaining items. The total dropped from $47 to $32. His card went through. Marcus gathered his groceries into reusable bags that had been repaired with duct tape, nodded politely to the cashier, and walked toward the exit with the posture of a man who'd learned not to let the world see him bend. Victoria stood frozen with her expensive wine, watching this man return baby formula so he could buy ramen. And something shifted in her understanding of the universe. She'd spent 20 years building an empire, acquiring power and wealth and influence, convinced these things measured success. But this man, returning formula in a grocery store at night, possessed a kind of dignity she'd never achieved. He had nothing. Yet he had everything that actually mattered. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd just witnessed something more valuable than any quarterly earnings report she'd ever reviewed. If you're watching from Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, or anywhere else where people work themselves to exhaustion just to survive, comment where you're from. Let's build something here. Victoria paid for her wine and walked to her car, a Tesla that cost more than Marcus probably earned in 2 years. She sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. She kept seeing his face, the way he'd looked at that formula before handing it back. Not defeated, not ashamed, just accepting reality with the kind of grace that suggested he did this often, that this was simply another moment in a long series of impossible choices. She'd built her entire life on the premise that success meant never having to make choices like that. She'd escaped poverty through intelligence and ruthlessness, clawed her way from a struggling immigrant family to the top of an industry, convinced that wealth equaled freedom. But sitting in her luxury vehicle, watching Marcus load duct-taped grocery bags into a 15-year-old sedan, she wondered if she'd been measuring freedom wrong her entire life. The man drove away. Victoria started her car and went home to her penthouse, where she drank half the bottle of wine and couldn't stop thinking about formula being returned in a checkout line. Marcus Chen arrived home at 11:53 p.m. to the small apartment he rented in a building where the heat worked intermittently and the neighbors argued in 3 different languages. His mother-in-law, Rosa, was asleep on the couch with Emma against her chest, both of them breathing in synchronized rhythm. Rosa was 68 and worked as a hotel housekeeper during the day, so she could watch Emma at night while Marcus worked his warehouse shift. Their arrangement was built on mutual desperation and love that transcended circumstances. He set the groceries down quietly, careful not to wake them. Emma stirred slightly, and Marcus felt his heart contract the way it always did when he looked at his daughter. She was 6 months old, with her mother's eyes and a smile that made every impossible thing feel possible. Her mother, Lynn, had died 9 hours after Emma was born, a hemorrhage the doctors couldn't stop, and Marcus had become a widower and a father in the same breath. He'd promised Lynn in those final moments when she was slipping away that Emma would have everything, that their daughter would grow up knowing she was loved, that she'd never feel the weight of their poverty, that he would move heaven and earth to give her a good life. He'd kept that promise every single day for 6 months, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, building a life from willpower and love when the universe had taken everything else. But promises didn't pay for formula. And tonight, looking at his sleeping daughter, Marcus did the mathematics he'd been avoiding. The formula he'd returned would last maybe 3 more days. Then what? He had 4 different shifts this week at the warehouse, 2 landscaping jobs on the weekend, and morning delivery routes that started at 5 a.m. Every dollar was spoken for before he earned it. There was no room in the budget for mistakes or emergencies, no cushion between survival and catastrophe. Rosa woke when he moved toward them. She looked at him with eyes that held too much understanding. "Formula?" she asked quietly in Spanish. "Friday," he said, which was both truth and lie. He'd find a way by Friday. He always did. Rosa nodded, accepting this because she'd spent 68 years learning that sometimes you had to accept what you couldn't change. Marcus lifted Emma carefully, held her against his chest, and felt her tiny hand curl around his finger in sleep. This was why. This right here. Every impossible choice, every returned formula, every exhausted morning when he couldn't remember what rest felt like. This was the reason. His daughter would grow up knowing her father showed up, that he kept his promises, that love wasn't measured by bank accounts. He put Emma in her crib, kissed her forehead, and lay down on his own bed without undressing. He'd sleep for 3 hours, wake at 4 a.m. for the delivery route, work until noon, grab 2 hours rest, then head to the warehouse for the night shift. Tomorrow would be exactly like today, and the day after that, until something changed or he simply stopped being able to continue. But tonight, lying in the dark, he thought about the formula he'd returned and wondered if dignity was worth the cost when your daughter needed to eat. Victoria Castellanos woke at 6 a.m. in her penthouse, showered in her marble bathroom, and dressed in a suit that cost $3,000. She had a board meeting at 8, lunch with investors at noon, and a charity gala that evening, where she'd write checks to organizations that help people like Marcus while never actually meeting them. Her life was scheduled in 15-minute increments, orchestrated for maximum efficiency, optimized for everything except meaning. She couldn't stop thinking about the man in the grocery store. During the board meeting, while her CFO presented quarterly projections, she found herself wondering if that man had slept at all. If his baby had enough formula. If anyone in his life understood the quiet heroism of returning something your child needed, because the mathematics of poverty left no other choice. Victoria, her CFO, was looking at her expectantly. The entire board was looking at her. "Yes," she said, pulling herself back to the present. "The projections look solid. Continue." But her mind was elsewhere. She'd built an empire on understanding human behavior, on predicting what people wanted and giving it to them at precisely the right price point. Yet she'd somehow never learned to see people like Marcus, the ones who moved through the world invisibly, sacrificing everything while the rest of them climbed over each other for status and wealth. After the meeting, she did something she'd never done before. She told her assistant to clear her afternoon schedule. Then she drove back to that grocery store in the middle of the day, which made no logical sense, and walked inside like she might find answers in the aisles. The store looked different in daylight, more mundane, less like a stage where moral choices played out in checkout lines. She walked past the formula section and saw the exact brand Marcus had returned. $34 for a canister that would last maybe a week for a 6-month-old. She picked it up, held it, tried to imagine making the choice to put it back because you literally couldn't afford both food for yourself and nutrition for your child. She couldn't imagine it, that was the problem. She'd escaped poverty so completely that she'd lost the ability to understand what it actually felt like. Have you ever done good only to be invisible? Ever sacrificed something and had no one witness it or acknowledge it? Tell me in the comments, because I think we miss most of the heroism happening right in front of us. Victoria bought the formula. She didn't know why. She had no baby, no connection to Marcus, no logical reason to purchase infant nutrition. But she bought it anyway and put it in her car, and it sat in her passenger seat like a question she didn't know how to answer. She went to the charity gala that evening and listened to wealthy people congratulate each other for caring about poverty, while servers who probably couldn't afford formula worked invisibly around them. She wrote a check for $50,000 to an organization that fed struggling families, and the director thanked her profusely, and Victoria felt absolutely nothing. She left early, drove home, and found herself pulling up Marcus's transaction records. She owned the grocery chain where she'd seen him. It took her exactly 12 minutes to find his purchase history, cross-reference his payment card, and pull up his information. This was ethically questionable and possibly illegal, but she did it anyway because she needed to know. Marcus Chen, 32 years old. Address in a neighborhood she owned property in but had never actually visited. Purchase history that told a story more clearly than any biography. Bulk rice, instant ramen, baby supplies, nothing expensive, nothing frivolous, everything calculated for maximum efficiency. He shopped at 11 p.m. every Tuesday night, always the same time, which meant he worked a shift that ended around then. She cross-referenced his address with her company's employment database. He didn't work for her directly, but she found him anyway. Night shift warehouse worker at a distribution center her company contracted with, $12 an hour, 30 hours a week, because anything over that would require benefits. Victoria sat in her home office, surrounded by art that cost more than Marcus would earn in 5 years, and did mathematics. $12 an hour, 30 hours a week, came to about $1,400 a month before taxes. Rent in that neighborhood ran $800 minimum for a 1-bedroom. Formula cost over $100 monthly. Utilities, food, transportation, basic survival, the numbers didn't work. The mathematics of his life were literally impossible. Yet he was making it work somehow. 3 jobs, she guessed. Maybe 4. Working every available hour, sleeping whenever he could steal a few minutes, holding his life together through sheer force of will. She opened her laptop and started writing an email to the warehouse management company. Then she stopped. This wasn't a problem she could solve with executive orders or policy changes. This was something else entirely. Something that required her to actually see another human being instead of optimizing a system. She closed the laptop and picked up her phone instead. It took her 15 minutes to find the warehouse facility's main number. She called and asked to speak to someone about employee scheduling. "I'd like to inquire about Marcus Chen," she said to the night supervisor, who eventually picked up. "I understand he works night shift. I'm wondering about his situation." There was a pause. "Who is this?" Someone who wants to help, Victoria said, which was both true and incomplete. Can you tell me anything about him? The supervisor, a man named Derek who sounded tired in a way that suggested he worked nights by necessity, not choice, considered the question. He's one of the good ones, Derek finally said. Shows up on time, works hard, never complains. Heard his wife died when their baby was born. He's raising the kid alone. Works here, works landscaping on weekends, does delivery routes in the mornings. I don't know how he's still standing, honestly. Does he ever ask for help? Never, Derek said immediately. We've offered him overtime, better shifts, extra hours. He just thanks us and says he's managing. Pride, I guess. Or maybe he's just so tired he can't think straight anymore. Victoria thanked him and hung up. She sat in her penthouse and thought about a man working 3 jobs to raise a baby alone, refusing help, returning formula in grocery stores, and somehow maintaining the kind of dignity that made refusing assistance seem noble instead of stubborn. She'd never met anyone like him. In her world, everyone wanted something. Everyone had an angle. Everyone was performing elaborate calculations about leverage and advantage. But Marcus Chen, working himself into dust for $12 an hour, apparently operated on completely different mathematics. She needed to meet him, not to help him. She was starting to understand that offering help might be the worst thing she could do to someone like Marcus. But to understand him, to figure out what made a person choose dignity over survival, integrity over ease, sacrifice over self-preservation. She just had to figure out how to do it without destroying the very thing she was trying to understand. Marcus worked his Thursday night warehouse shift in a fog of exhaustion that had become his permanent state of being. His body moved on autopilot. Scan package, load truck, move to next package, repeat 800 times until the shift ended. His mind was elsewhere, doing the calculations that never stopped. Emma needed formula by Saturday. He'd stretched the current canister by diluting it slightly. A dangerous game. He hated playing but couldn't avoid. He had $83 in his account. Rent was due Monday. The math didn't work. It never worked. He'd figure something out. He always did. Chen, Derek called from across the warehouse floor. Got someone here wants to talk to you. Marcus looked up, confused. No one ever wanted to talk to him. He wasn't important enough to talk to. He was a barcode scanner with a pulse, invisible and interchangeable. He walked over to Derek's office and found a woman standing there in a business suit that probably cost more than his car. She was striking in a way that suggested wealth and power, somewhere in her early 40s, with dark hair and eyes that were watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Marcus Chen, she asked, extending her hand. I'm Victoria Castellanos. I was hoping we could talk. He shook her hand, bewildered. The name meant nothing to him. About what? I saw you, she said simply. Tuesday night, at the grocery store. You returned formula. Marcus felt his face flush with shame and anger. Who was this woman? Why was she here? What gave her the right to witness his worst moments and then track him down like he was some kind of charity case? I don't need help, he said, his voice flat. If you're here to offer money or whatever, I'm not interested. Are you a single dad working multiple jobs just to survive? Tell me your city in the comments. Let's show the world how many of us are out here, doing what needs to be done. Victoria held up both hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm not here to offer you anything, she said. I'm here because I haven't been able to stop thinking about what I saw, the choice you made, the way you made it. I wanted to understand. Understand what? Marcus asked. That I'm poor. That I can't afford formula for my daughter? Congratulations, you've solved the mystery. No, Victoria said quietly. I wanted to understand how someone who has nothing can have more dignity than people who have everything. I wanted to understand what makes character more powerful than circumstances. I've spent my entire life believing wealth equals freedom, and then I saw you return that formula and I realized I might be completely wrong about everything." Marcus stared at her. This made no sense. Rich people didn't come to warehouses at midnight to discuss philosophy with minimum wage workers. Rich people definitely didn't track down random strangers from grocery stores to ask them about dignity and character. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm the CEO of the company that owns the grocery chain where I saw you," Victoria said. "I'm a person who has everything money can buy and nothing that actually matters. I'm someone who saw you make an impossible choice with grace and realized I've never made a real sacrifice in my life." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He was too tired for whatever this was, too exhausted to pass the motivations of wealthy strangers who appeared in warehouses with philosophical questions about poverty. "I need to get back to work," he said. "I know," Victoria said. "I'm sorry for interrupting. She paused, and for the first time she looked uncertain, vulnerable. "I just wanted you to know that someone saw, that your choice mattered, that returning that formula wasn't invisible." She handed him a business card with just her name and a phone number. "If you ever want to talk, or if you ever need anything, or if you just want to tell me to leave you alone, my direct line." Then she left, walking out of the warehouse like she'd just conducted a normal business meeting instead of appearing in the middle of the night to discuss dignity with a stranger. Marcus looked at the card, then at Derek, who was watching from his office with raised eyebrows. "That was Victoria Castellanos," Derek said slowly, "as in the Victoria Castellanos, as in the woman who probably owns half of California. What did you do?" "I returned baby formula in a grocery store," Marcus said, which was the truth but sounded absurd when spoken aloud. He put the card in his pocket and went back to work. But for the rest of his shift, he couldn't stop thinking about a woman who had everything coming to a warehouse to talk to a man who had nothing about the nature of dignity. The world had officially stopped making sense. Victoria drove home from the warehouse and sat in her car for 20 minutes before going inside. She'd just done something completely irrational, tracking down a stranger, showing up at his workplace at midnight, essentially admitting she'd been surveilling his grocery purchases. This was behavior that would get anyone else a restraining order. But she'd needed to see him, needed to understand if the dignity she'd witnessed was real or just her own projection, her own desperate attempt to find meaning in a life that had lost all of it somewhere between her first billion and her 41st birthday. And what she'd found was more than she expected. Marcus Chen wasn't dignified in the abstract philosophical way she'd imagined. He was dignified in the exhausted, practical, completely unglamorous way of a man who simply didn't know how to be anything else. He'd been angry when she appeared, suspicious, protective of his pride, in a way that made sense when the world had given him nothing but hard choices and insufficient options. He was real. That was the revelation. Not a symbol or a teaching moment, but an actual human being grinding himself down to nothing for a daughter who would never know the cost. She went inside and poured herself a glass of wine and didn't drink it. Instead, she pulled up her company's employee assistance programs, her charitable foundation's allocation frameworks, her network of contacts and resources. She could solve this, write a check, make a phone call, create a job, engineer a solution that would change Marcus's life without him ever knowing she was behind it. But even as she considered these options, she knew they were wrong. Marcus had refused help. He'd looked at her offer with something close to contempt. Forcing assistance on someone who'd made it clear they didn't want it wasn't generosity, it was violence disguised as kindness. So what was she supposed to do? Watch a good man destroy himself through sheer stubborn pride? Accept that some people would rather suffer than accept help? Let dignity win, even when dignity meant a baby might go hungry? She didn't have answers. For the first time in 20 years of solving complex business problems, Victoria Castellanos encountered a situation that money and power couldn't fix. All she could do was wait, and hope that if Marcus ever did need help, he'd swallow his pride long enough to call. The weekend arrived, and Marcus worked his landscaping jobs in neighborhoods where people paid more for lawn maintenance than he earned in a month. He mowed lawns and trimmed hedges and smiled politely at homeowners who talked to him the way people talk to furniture: necessary, functional, essentially invisible. On Sunday morning, while edging a driveway in Brentwood, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Marcus Chen, a woman's voice, professional and brisk. Yes? My name is Sarah Winters. I'm with the Castellanos Foundation. Ms. Castellanos mentioned you might be interested in our single-parent employment program. We offer... Marcus hung up. He stood in someone's perfect lawn with his phone in his hand and felt anger rise in his chest like a physical thing. Victoria Castellanos had seemed genuine in the warehouse, seemed like she actually understood that he didn't want charity, but apparently understanding and respecting were different things. He finished the lawn work, went home, and found Rosa watching Emma in the living room. His daughter was sitting in her bouncer, smiling at nothing in particular, perfect and beautiful and completely dependent on him, finding a way to keep her alive. Formula? Rosa asked, which had become their shorthand for the daily crisis management. Tomorrow, Marcus said, which meant he'd figure something out by tomorrow. Maybe sell something, maybe skip more meals himself, maybe dilute the formula a bit more and pray Emma didn't get sick. He picked up his daughter and held her while she grabbed at his face with tiny hands. She was everything: the formula situation, the exhaustion, the impossible mathematics. None of it mattered compared to this. He'd figure it out. He always did. That night, lying in bed while Emma slept in her crib, Marcus pulled out Victoria's business card. He stared at the phone number and felt anger and curiosity war inside him. She tried to help by sending her foundation after him. She completely missed the point, but she'd also shown up in a warehouse at midnight to ask about dignity, which was either genuine interest or the most elaborate charity manipulation he'd ever encountered. He didn't call. He put the card back in his drawer and tried to sleep. Single dads in Houston, Atlanta, Phoenix, Detroit. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. Let's see how many of us are out here. Monday arrived with a new crisis. Emma woke up at 3 a.m. crying in a way that made Marcus's heart stop. Not her normal cry. Something else. Something wrong. He picked her up and felt heat radiating from her tiny body. Fever. High fever. Rosa woke immediately, coming into the room with the instincts of a woman who'd raised 5 children. She touched Emma's forehead and looked at Marcus with worry. "Hospital," she said. "I can't," Marcus started, then stopped. Because what was he going to say? That he couldn't afford the emergency room? That even with Medicaid, the copays would devastate his budget? That choosing between his daughter's health and next month's rent wasn't actually a choice? He wrapped Emma in a blanket and drove to the emergency room while Rosa stayed behind, in case this turned into an all-night situation. The ER waiting room at 4 a.m. was full of people who looked like him, exhausted, scared, there because they'd waited as long as they possibly could before admitting they needed help. 6 hours later, after tests and examinations and waiting that felt like torture, a doctor told him Emma had a respiratory infection, common in infants, not life-threatening if treated properly. She needed antibiotics and rest and monitoring. The bill, even with insurance, would be $400. Marcus signed the paperwork because what else was he going to do? Let his daughter suffer to preserve his budget? He drove home with antibiotics and instructions and a daughter who was already starting to improve, and he did mathematics in his head that made him want to scream. $400. Rent was already late. He had $6 in his account. The delivery route paid on Friday, but that money was allocated before he earned it. The warehouse wouldn't pay until next week. The landscaping jobs might cover groceries if he was careful. There was no room in his life for a $400 medical bill, but there was also no universe in which he didn't pay for his daughter's health. He got home, gave Emma her first dose of medicine, and watched her fall asleep in his arms. Then he sat on his couch and stared at nothing while Rosa made tea neither of them wanted. "You should call someone," Rosa finally said in Spanish. "Ask for help." "There's no one to call," Marcus said, which was true. His parents had died years ago. Lynn's family was in Taiwan with no resources to spare. His friends were all in the same economic situation he was, grinding through life paycheck to paycheck. "The woman," Rosa said, "the one who came to the warehouse." Marcus had told Rosa about Victoria's visit, though he'd left out the part about her sending Foundation people after him. "No," he said firmly. "Pride doesn't feed babies," Rosa said, which was both harsh and true. "It's not about pride," Marcus said. "It's about—" He stopped because he didn't know how to explain it. It was about dignity and self-respect, and maintaining some sense that he was a person capable of managing his own life. It was about not becoming a charity case, a story wealthy people told themselves to feel good about their generosity. But it was also about Emma. And Emma needed to eat and stay healthy more than Marcus needed to protect his pride. He pulled out Victoria's card and stared at the number. He didn't call. Not yet. But he kept the card on the table where he could see it. A possibility he wasn't ready to accept, but couldn't completely dismiss. Victoria spent Monday in meetings that felt increasingly pointless. Strategic planning sessions about market expansion, discussions about quarterly targets, presentations about consumer behavior patterns, all of it felt like playing a game whose rules she'd suddenly stopped believing in. She kept checking her phone, which was absurd. Marcus Chen wasn't going to call. Why would he? She'd violated his privacy, showed up uninvited at his workplace, and then sent her foundation after him like she could solve poverty with a phone call and some bureaucracy. She'd done exactly what wealthy people always did. Tried to fix other people's problems without bothering to understand that maybe the problem was the entire system that created such vast inequality in the first place. Her assistant knocked on her office door at 3 p.m. Ms. Winters from the foundation called, said she spoke to Marcus Chen, but he hung up on her. Victoria closed her eyes. Of course he had, because she'd completely misread the situation. Marcus didn't want programs or assistance or employment opportunities. He wanted to be left alone, to manage his impossible life with whatever dignity he could maintain. She'd made a mistake. Now she had to figure out how to fix it without making things worse. She called Sarah Winters back. "Don't contact Marcus Chen again," she said. "Remove him from all lists. No follow-up." "But Ms. Castellanos, he's exactly the kind of person our programs are designed to—" "I know," Victoria interrupted. "But he doesn't want help, and I'm starting to think that matters more than what we want to give him." She hung up and sat in her office watching the city spread out below her penthouse headquarters. Millions of people down there, thousands of them probably facing the same choices Marcus faced daily. She could write checks, fund programs, create initiatives, but she couldn't actually see them, couldn't know them as human beings rather than demographics and statistics. Except now she'd seen one. Marcus Chen, returning formula in a grocery store, and seeing one had broken something in her carefully constructed understanding of how the world worked. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "This is Marcus Chen." His voice was tight, strained. "You said if I ever needed anything. Did you mean it? What invisible sacrifice are you making right now that nobody sees? Comment below. Let's acknowledge the weight we all carry." Victoria sat up straight, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes," she said, "I meant it. What do you need?" There was a long pause. She could hear him breathing, hear the sound of his pride being swallowed, hear the cost of making this call. "My daughter was in the emergency room this morning," he said. "Respiratory infection. She's okay, but the bill is $400 and I—" He stopped, started again. "I don't have it, and I don't know how to get it, and I'm asking for help even though it's killing me to ask." "Where are you?" Victoria asked, already grabbing her keys. "At home, but I don't want you to come here. I don't want—" He stopped again. "I don't know what I want. I just need help, and I don't know how to accept it." "I understand," Victoria said, and she did. Finally, she actually did understand. "Tell me your address. I'm coming over, not to give you money or fix your problems, just to talk, human to human. Is that okay?" Another pause. Then he gave her his address. Victoria drove to a neighborhood she'd never visited despite owning property there. Run-down apartment buildings, streets that needed repaving, evidence of systematic disinvestment everywhere she looked. She'd built wealth by optimizing retail spaces and supply chains, but she'd never once driven through the neighborhoods where her lowest-paid workers actually lived. She found Marcus's building and climbed 3 flights of stairs with graffiti on the walls and a distinct smell of poverty and desperation. She knocked on apartment 3C and heard movement inside, voices speaking Spanish. Then the door opened. Marcus stood there, holding his daughter. Behind him, Victoria could see an older woman, his mother-in-law, she guessed, and an apartment that was tiny and clean and filled with evidence of someone trying desperately to make poverty look like home. Emma was beautiful, 6 months old, with huge dark eyes and a face that showed recent distress. She was wrapped in a blanket that looked handmade, probably by the grandmother, and she was staring at Victoria with the intensity that babies have when they're trying to understand if a stranger is safe. "Come in," Marcus said quietly. Victoria stepped into his world and felt every assumption she'd ever made about success and failure crack down the middle. This apartment was smaller than her walk-in closet. Everything in it was worn, repaired, stretched past its intended use. But it was also clearly a home, filled with love and effort, and the daily heroism of making impossible situations work through sheer force of will. Rosa, the grandmother, nodded to Victoria and then took Emma into what must be a bedroom, giving them privacy. Marcus gestured to a couch that had seen better decades. They sat. Marcus looked at her with exhaustion and defiance and something like shame all mixed together. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I don't know why I called you. I don't even know you. But you said someone saw, and I guess I needed that to be true. I needed someone to witness this and understand that I'm trying, that I'm not failing because I'm lazy or stupid or incapable. I'm failing because the mathematics don't work and I don't know how to fix it." Victoria felt something break open in her chest. "You're not failing," she said. "You're raising a daughter alone while working 3 jobs. You're keeping her alive and loved in a system designed to make that impossible. That's not failure. That's heroism." "Heroism doesn't pay medical bills," Marcus said, but there was no bitterness in it, just exhaustion. "No," Victoria agreed, "it doesn't. So let me pay the medical bill." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I can't." "You can," Victoria interrupted gently. "Not because you need rescue, not because I'm better than you, but because I have resources I didn't earn, and you have needs you didn't choose. And somewhere in that gap, maybe there's a way for both of us to be more human." "That sounds like charity," Marcus said. "It's not," Victoria said. "Charity is giving to people you don't see to make yourself feel good. This is seeing you, actually seeing you, and recognizing that you're doing something extraordinary with absolutely nothing. This is me learning what wealth actually means by watching you be richer than I'll ever be, despite having $400 less." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I don't understand you," he said finally. I don't understand me either anymore, Victoria admitted. A week ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what mattered. Then I saw you return formula in a grocery store, and every certainty I had fell apart. I'm not here to save you, Marcus. I'm here because you're teaching me what it means to be human, and I've apparently forgotten. Know a single dad whose story deserves to be heard, someone whose character outweighs his circumstances. Drop his story in the comments. Include his city. Let's celebrate the invisible heroes. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Victoria watched him, this man who had nothing but possessed everything that actually mattered. After a moment, he turned back to her. If you pay the medical bill, he said slowly, what happens next? Do you feel good about helping? Do I feel ashamed about needing it? Do we both pretend this makes us friends when really we're just acting out some story about rich person meets poor person? I don't know, Victoria said honestly. I've never done this before. I've written checks to organizations and funded programs and donated to causes, but I've never actually sat in someone's living room and had to face what poverty really looks like, what strength really looks like. I don't have a script for this. Neither do I, Marcus said. I've never asked for help before, never. I've worked myself half to death to avoid this exact moment, and now here we are, and I don't know the rules. Maybe there aren't rules, Victoria said. Maybe it's just two people trying to figure out how to be human together in a world that doesn't make being human very easy. Marcus sat back down. He looked at Emma's closed bedroom door, then back at Victoria. Okay, he said. Pay the medical bill. But I need you to understand something. I'm not your project. I'm not a teaching moment. I'm a person who's failing at an impossible task and will probably need help again, and that doesn't make me someone you get to fix or learn from or feel good about helping. I know, Victoria said, and I need you to understand something too. I have $4 billion. I earned maybe 5% of it through actual work and the rest through investments and market timing and being born at the right time in the right circumstances. That money doesn't make me better than you. It makes me luckier, and what I'm learning is that luck and worth have nothing to do with each other. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Marcus laughed, a sound that held more exhaustion than humor. This is the strangest conversation I've ever had, he said. Same, Victoria agreed, but maybe strange is what we both need right now. She pulled out her phone and made a transfer. $400 into Marcus's account, just like that. A number that meant nothing to her and everything to him. The inequality of it was obscene, but refusing to help because the inequality was obscene would only hurt Emma, and Emma hadn't chosen any of this. Done, she said. The bill is paid. Marcus looked at his phone, saw the confirmation and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there were tears there that he didn't bother hiding. Thank you, he said, and the words held weight that Victoria had never heard before. Not the automatic thank you of social convention, but genuine gratitude that came from someone who'd been drowning and had just been given a chance to breathe. You're welcome, Victoria said. Then, because honesty seemed important, but I don't want your gratitude. I want to understand how you do this, how you maintain dignity when the world is systematically stripping it from you, how you love your daughter well when you barely have time to sleep, how you're still standing when the mathematics of your life are literally impossible. I don't know, Marcus said. I just do it because the alternative is giving up, and giving up isn't an option when you have a daughter looking at you like you hung the moon. Victoria thought about that. About having a reason to exist that was bigger than yourself, more important than your own exhaustion or despair. She'd built a company, created jobs, generated wealth. But she'd never had anyone look at her the way Emma looked at Marcus, with complete trust and absolute love, and the certainty that this person would move mountains if necessary. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said suddenly. "Anything." "Why do you care? Really, you're a billionaire CEO. You could be anywhere doing anything. Why are you sitting in my apartment asking philosophical questions about poverty and dignity?" Victoria considered the question. She could give him easy answers about social responsibility or wanting to make a difference, but he deserved the truth. "Because I'm 41 years old, and I have everything money can buy, and I come home every night to an empty penthouse where I drink expensive wine alone and review quarterly reports," she said. "Because I've spent 20 years optimizing my life for success, and somewhere along the way I lost track of what success actually means. Because I saw you return formula in a grocery store and recognized something I've been missing my entire adult life." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "Purpose," Victoria said. "You have purpose. You know exactly why you're here and what matters and who you're doing this for. I have money and power and influence and absolutely no idea why any of it matters. You're richer than I'll ever be, and I think part of me came here hoping some of that richness might be contagious." Marcus stared at her. "That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me," he said finally. "It's the most honest thing I've said to anyone," Victoria admitted. They talked until Rosa brought Emma back out, clearly deciding the stranger had been vetted sufficiently. Emma was drowsy from medicine and recent trauma, but she smiled when she saw her father, and Victoria watched Marcus's entire face transform. All the exhaustion and stress disappeared for a moment, replaced by pure love. "She's beautiful," Victoria said. "She's everything," Marcus replied simply. Victoria left an hour later with Marcus's phone number saved in her contacts and a standing invitation to visit again if she wanted. She drove back to her penthouse and sat in her empty living room and felt the weight of her own loneliness more acutely than she ever had before. She just spent the evening in a tiny apartment that probably violated housing codes, talking with a man who could barely afford to feed himself, holding a baby who'd been in the emergency room that morning. It should have been depressing, should have made her grateful for her own comfortable life. Instead, she felt like she'd just witnessed something sacred, real love, real sacrifice, real purpose, all the things her money had somehow prevented her from experiencing. She picked up her phone and did something she'd never done before. She called her assistant and told her to clear her entire schedule for the next week. No meetings, no calls, no obligations. Just time to think about what she wanted her life to actually be for. Then she poured herself a glass of wine, didn't drink it, and sat watching the city lights, thinking about a man who returned formula and taught her everything she'd been missing about what it meant to be human. The next few weeks unfolded in ways neither of them expected. Victoria didn't show up at Marcus's apartment with solutions or programs or attempts to fix his life. Instead, she just appeared occasionally, usually in the evening after his delivery route, but before his warehouse shift, and they talked. They talked about poverty and wealth, about dignity and desperation, about what it meant to be a good parent when the world made that almost impossible. They talked about Victoria's immigrant parents, who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through college, about how she'd spent 20 years trying to escape poverty, and had somehow lost herself in the process. They talked about Marcus's wife, about grief and loss, and learning to be both mother and father to a baby who would never remember her mother. Rosa started setting an extra plate at dinner on the nights Victoria visited. Emma started reaching for Victoria the way babies reach for familiar people, and slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted between them. Marcus started calling Victoria when he had questions about things outside his experience. Legal documents from the hospital, weird letters from government agencies, bureaucratic mazes he didn't know how to navigate. Victoria started asking Marcus about things she'd forgotten or never learned, how to find meaning in work, how to love something more than success, how to be present instead of always optimizing. They weren't friends exactly. The inequality was too vast. the power dynamics too imbalanced, but they were something. Two people from completely different worlds learning from each other, teaching each other, becoming more human together than they'd been separately. Victoria didn't fix Marcus's poverty. She paid for things sometimes, groceries that appeared on his doorstep, the electric bill when it was past due, new winter clothes for Emma when the weather turned cold. But she did it quietly, without ceremony, and Marcus accepted it because he was learning that accepting help didn't diminish his dignity when the help came from someone who genuinely saw him. And Marcus didn't fix Victoria's loneliness. But he gave her something to care about beyond quarterly earnings, someone whose life mattered more than market share, a purpose that went deeper than optimizing supply chains. Emma smiled when she saw Victoria, and that smile meant more than any board meeting victory. 3 months after the grocery store incident, Marcus's warehouse closed. The company lost a major contract, and overnight, 200 people, including Marcus, were out of work. He called Victoria at 2 in the morning, not asking for help, but just needing someone to know that his carefully balanced life had just collapsed. She showed up at his apartment 30 minutes later with coffee and no solutions, and they sat on his couch while Emma slept and talked about fear and uncertainty and what happens when the impossible mathematics finally fail completely. "I don't know what to do," Marcus admitted. "The warehouse was the anchor job. The other two don't pay enough without it. I can't make rent next month. I can't afford formula. I can't—" He stopped, overwhelmed. "You could work for my company," Victoria said carefully. "I have a position that would pay you enough to support Emma. Good benefits, reasonable hours. It's not charity, it's a real job that needs doing." Marcus looked at her. "Would I have gotten this job if we'd never met?" Victoria considered lying, then decided against it. "No," she said. "But that doesn't make it charity. It makes it opportunity created by connection, which is how most good jobs happen. I'm not rescuing you. I'm offering you a different path because I know you're capable and I trust you." "What's the job?" Marcus asked. "Director of Community Engagement," Victoria said. "You'd work with our lowest-paid employees, understand their needs, help design programs that actually serve them instead of just making us feel good. You'd be the person who sees what I've been missing, the human cost of our efficiency models, the lives behind our optimization strategies." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "That's a made-up job," he finally said. "You created it for me." "I created it because I need it," Victoria corrected. "I've been running a company without understanding the people who actually make it work. I need someone who knows what it's like to return formula in grocery stores, who understands impossible mathematics, who can tell me when our policies are harming people instead of helping them. That's not charity. That's hiring someone with expertise I don't have." "What's the most character-revealing choice you've ever made when no one was watching? Tell me below." "How much does it pay?" Marcus asked. Victoria named a figure that was 3 times what his 3 jobs combined had paid him. Marcus closed his eyes. "That's too much," he said. "It's market rate for the position," Victoria said. "Check comparable roles at other companies if you don't believe me. I'm not overpaying you. I'm paying you what you're worth instead of what the warehouse paid you, which was exploitation disguised as employment." Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her. "If I take this job," he said slowly, "does our relationship change? Do I become your employee who owes you everything? Do you become my boss who can hold this over me whenever you want?" "I hope not," Victoria said honestly. "But I don't know. I've never tried to be friends with someone I also employ. We'd have to figure it out together. Make mistakes, probably. Hurt each other accidentally. Work through the power dynamics carefully." "That sounds complicated," Marcus said. "It does," Victoria agreed. "But complicated is better than you not being able to afford formula. Complicated is better than Emma growing up with a father who worked himself to death trying to maintain pride. Sometimes complicated is the best option available. Marcus thought about it, about dignity and desperation, about pride and pragmatism, about whether accepting help from someone who genuinely saw you was fundamentally different from accepting charity from someone who wanted to feel good about themselves. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll take the job, but I need you to promise me something, anything. If I mess up, you fire me. If I'm not good at this, you let me go. Don't keep me because you feel guilty or because we have some kind of weird friendship. Treat me like a real employee, not a project." "I promise," Victoria said, "but I don't think you're going to mess up. I think you're going to be extraordinary at this because you actually understand what our lowest paid employees experience in ways I never could." Marcus started his new job 2 weeks later. He had an office, health insurance that actually covered things, and a salary that meant he could afford both formula and rent simultaneously for the first time in 6 months. Rosa quit her hotel housekeeping job and became Emma's full-time caregiver. Marcus slept more than 4 hours for the first time since his daughter was born. But the real change wasn't the money or the benefits. It was that Marcus finally had work that mattered, that used his expertise in poverty and survival and making impossible situations work. He talked to warehouse workers and delivery drivers and store clerks, and he understood them in ways management consultants never could. He designed programs that actually helped because he knew exactly what help looked like when you were drowning. And Victoria learned. She sat in meetings where Marcus explained why their efficiency models created poverty, why their scheduling practices destroyed families, why their benefit structures excluded the people who needed them most. She listened to him in ways she'd never listened to anyone, because he'd earned her respect by living through everything she'd only theorized about. 6 months after Marcus started, Victoria restructured her entire company's employment practices. Minimum wage went to $20 an hour. Scheduling became predictable. Benefits became accessible. The board was horrified by the cost. Victoria showed them the turnover reduction, the productivity increases, the employee satisfaction scores. "We were creating the poverty we claimed to care about," she told them. "Marcus helped me see that. And fixing it isn't charity, it's good business and basic human decency combined." The changes rippled through the company, through the industry, through the communities where they operated. Other companies started following suit. Workers' lives improved. And Victoria's bottom line, contrary to board predictions, actually increased because it turns out people work better when they can afford to eat. But the real transformation happened quietly, in the moments between work and friendship, between employer and employee, between two people from different worlds learning to actually see each other. Emma's first birthday party was in Marcus's small apartment, with Rosa making traditional Taiwanese food and Victoria bringing a cake from a bakery that cost more than Marcus used to earn in a week. Emma smashed her face into the cake with pure joy, and Victoria laughed harder than she'd laughed in years, and Marcus looked at his daughter and his mother-in-law and his bizarre friendship with a billionaire CEO and thought about how strange and beautiful life could be when you stopped trying to control it. "Thank you," he said to Victoria later, while they cleaned frosting off Emma's high chair. "For what?" Victoria asked. "For seeing me," Marcus said simply. "That night in the grocery store, when I returned the formula, you saw me, really saw me, not as a problem to fix or a story to tell, but as a person doing his best with impossible circumstances. That changed everything." Victoria paused in her cleaning. "You changed everything for me too," she said. "I was living a life I didn't believe in, chasing success that didn't mean anything, surrounded by wealth that left me completely empty. You reminded me what actually matters. Purpose and love and showing up for people who need you. I was the one who needed rescuing, Marcus, not you." "That's a nice story," Marcus said with a slight smile. "But we both know I needed help. My pride almost destroyed me. If you hadn't shown up, if I hadn't called you that night—" "But you did call," Victoria interrupted. "That's the thing. You maintained your dignity for as long as humanly possible. And then, when it was truly necessary, you swallowed your pride and asked for help. That's not weakness. That's strength most people never develop." They finished cleaning in comfortable silence. Emma was asleep in her crib, exhausted from her party. Rosa was in the living room watching a telenovela. And two people from impossibly different worlds stood in a small kitchen and understood that they'd saved each other in ways that had nothing to do with money. A year after the grocery store incident, Victoria stood at a conference podium talking about corporate responsibility and employment practices. She told a story about seeing someone return baby formula, about learning that dignity and poverty weren't contradictions, about discovering that her company's efficiency models had been creating the exact problems they claimed to solve. She didn't name Marcus. That was their agreement. His story was his own, not hers to use for credibility or emotional impact, but she told what she'd learned from knowing someone who'd lived the consequences of her business decisions, and the audience listened in a way they never had when she talked about quarterly earnings. After the speech, a young woman approached her. "I'm a single mother," the woman said, "working 2 jobs, can barely afford childcare. That story you told, about the formula, that's my life every day. How do I get help without losing my dignity?" Victoria looked at this woman, saw Marcus in her exhausted eyes, saw herself in her desperate need for answers that made sense. "You ask," Victoria said. "You find someone who sees you as a person, not a problem, and you let them help in ways that honor both of you. It's not easy. It won't feel good, but it's better than destroying yourself to maintain pride that nobody benefits from." "How do I find someone like that?" the woman asked. "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "I got lucky, but I think there are more people willing to see than we imagine. We just have to risk being seen." The woman thanked her and left, and Victoria stood in the empty conference hall thinking about risk and dignity and the strange path that had brought her from lonely penthouse to found family in a small apartment where formula wasn't just affordable, but abundant. Her phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. "Emma just said Tory. You've been upgraded from that lady to actual person with a name. Rosa says you have to come to dinner to properly celebrate this milestone." Victoria smiled and texted back that she'd be there at 7. Then she looked at the empty conference hall, at the wealth and power and influence she'd accumulated, and realized none of it mattered as much as a baby learning to say her name. She'd spent 20 years building an empire, but she'd found meaning in a grocery store at midnight, watching a man return formula and teaching her everything she'd been missing about what it meant to be human. The turnaround wasn't that a rich person helped a poor person. It was that they both needed each other, that his sacrifice taught her about purpose, and her resources gave him space to breathe, and together they became more than they'd been separately. That dignity and desperation weren't opposites, but sometimes occupied the same moment, the same choice, the same person doing the impossible because love demanded it. That some men are rich in everything that counts, and some women are poor despite having billions, and recognizing the difference changes everything, that being seen, truly seen, matters more than being helped, that witnessing someone's character is itself a form of grace, that the world is full of invisible heroes maintaining dignity in impossible circumstances, and the only tragedy is that we so rarely notice them. Marcus Chen returned formula in a grocery store because the mathematics didn't work. Victoria Castellanos watched it happen and learned that she'd been measuring wealth wrong her entire life. And both of them discovered that the most valuable currency in the universe isn't money or power or success. It's being truly known by another human being and choosing to know them back. Emma's laughter echoed through the apartment that evening, while Marcus and Victoria prepared dinner together. Rosa watching them with the knowing smile of someone who'd seen impossible things become real through nothing more than two people deciding to actually see each other. The formula incident was 365 days behind them. But it lived on in every choice they made, to honor dignity over convenience, connection over transaction, seeing over solving. Some stories end with rescue. This one ended with recognition. And recognition, as it turns out, changes everything.